Welcome to the Mystic Detectives podcast, where we seek to unlock the wonders of the unknown. I'm one of your hosts, Crystal Miller.
And I'm your other host, Andrea Marziano. Hey, Crystal, how are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
I'm so good. The weather is beautiful today in the Pacific Northwest. It can, as many people say, change in about 10 minutes. It's going to be a high of 70, and I think it's reached that today. And then tomorrow it's going to be rainy and a little colder with a high of 51 or something. And it's
Yeesh.
kind of all over the board here. So I have a short sleeve shirt on today in advance of having a sweatshirt on tomorrow.
Yeah, we're in tornado season, but the weather's nice. It's cloudy, but it's about 77 degrees here, and it does get muggy in Oklahoma a lot of the times. I have to confess I have not been outside today. Um, Usually I'll go out at least once to let the dogs out, but today Odyssey's done all of that. But yeah, it was pretty muggy yesterday, but I'll take it. I love 77-degree weather, even if it's cloudy and
Yeah.
muggy.
That works so well. I don't mind the muggy if it's not too terribly hot, but I that's why I like the Pacific Northwest though, because we get our hot days and then we get our cool days and everything balances out. So it's great.
Yeah.
Have you been listening to anything new or watching anything new?
Okay. 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 I can't I'm not allowed to talk about it because Topher said I can't.
What?
It's called Murder in America. It's a
Yeah.
podcast, and I'm not recommending it necessarily, but I have to tell you that I am thoroughly enjoying it, because it's a couple that normally do paranormal stuff, but they're doing true crime, and they are trying to weave the paranormal into the true crime, and they're, uh, like this is gonna be condescending or sound condescending, but I think they are adorable doing it. They're not very good at it, and it's very, like, "What?" But I think it's just I think A for effort, E for effort? I don't know. It's great.
Yeah, it's
So,
great. Well, we all have our growing pains, don't we?
yeah, for sure, for sure.
We know how many times we put our feet in our mouths.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, that's interesting. I'll see if I can find that one. I have been listening to all my standard podcasts.
Their research is pretty phenomenal, though. But,
Oh,
yeah,
that's good.
yeah.
Yeah, and that segues into something that I wanted to bring up is, I did a lot more research that I recorded this time, and our topic today is about grounding, and I just wanted at the top of the show to say where I got most of my information, and I will actually put my sources on the YouTube link when it comes out. I got a lot of information from the National Institute of Health, which I thought was fascinating that they looked into grounding and earthing and the effects on the body and everything else. And they've been doing it for years. So that's where I got most of my information was National Institute of Health. And I find that source to be very reliable. They do a lot of good
Mhm.
studies and their studies are good sizes and they've gotten a lot of information. So most of the information I'm referring to is from there. I got a little bit from Healthline, which is more of a user friendly, not necessarily scientific, but they have lots of good information. They talk about grounding and grounding techniques. So I wanted to talk about that on the top of the show so I can acknowledge the sources that I used. And so, what do you know about grounding? We've talked a little bit about grounding, and there's a variety of types. The kind
Sure.
we've talked about. Do you remember what we talked about? I think it was in
I
our
think it was in
crystal healing.
our yeah, I think it was too. Well, I think we talked about both earthing and, like, crystals. Gosh, I don't remember. I can't even remember my own podcast. Sorry.
Well, I can tell you what we talked about.
Alright.
We talked about grounding in grounding our own spirit, as in focusing inward and connecting and clearing our minds. That's what we were referring to initially. We talked a little bit about one of our podcasts, I believe it was, also part of the crystal healing one, where you talked about sometimes you'll go outside and do the earthing you were just referring to.
Mhm.
And earthing and grounding, as I researched it, they can have two different meanings, but mostly they're really similar. So, in the therapeutic sense, grounding or earthing is a technique that involves reconnecting with the earth's electrical charge, right? And so, going out and actually touching the earth. And
Can I tell
go
you a
ahead.
funny story about that?
Sure. Hmm.
So when I was younger, teenager, we'll say 15, 16ish, I was always going outside barefoot and it drove my dad crazy. And
Mhm.
so he legit took me to the pediatrician and asked the pediatrician to tell me that if I continued going barefoot, things were going to burrow into my feet and kill me and I would die. And the pediatrician was like, it's fine if she goes barefoot.
There are some countries that's true, um, where there's weird worms and things like that, but mostly in the United States, you're not gonna find at
Yeah,
least the ones I know of. That's hilarious that the pediatrician said,
I mean, yeah,
false."
he really thought he was right, and it was just
Yeah,
so funny that he took all that time, all that effort to be wrong. Haha. Sorry,
that's
dad.
hilarious. That's funny. That is funny.
So I've always been a barefoot person, but anyway, please continue, sorry.
I have too. I was running across our backyard one time and stepped on what must have been a little beehive on the ground, and I got stung. And that could put me in shoes for a little while because I was so worried about being stung again. And I was stung multiple times. My foot got so huge.
Mhm.
And my mom was saying, "Oh, we might have to go to the doctor." And my mother to say we have to go to the doctor is a rare occurrence. So
Right.
she was getting pretty worried. And so it did keep me in shoes for a little while, but more often than not, I'm out of shoes. And so when we do this, when we reconnect with Earth's electrical charge, and it has been discovered, and we talk about these things being discovered like, woo, new information. No, it's been around forever, but Western medicine is going, oh, look, we could walk outside and hug a tree or something. Um, and but what they find is that in electrical sense, earthing or grounding is the process of transferring the electrical energy to the earth. And it is we do it with our bodies and our feet, but say when you plug in the three-prong plug in the house,
Mhm.
that third, the round one is the ground, which keeps electricity from arcing or causing problems in the wires, and it can prevent shocks or damage to equipment. Because if a piece of equipment is arcing, the ground will stop the connection, the way I understand it. Now, listeners, if you're electricians and I'm saying it incorrectly, please let us know. But the nurse's interpretation of that is what I just said,
Right.
and which works for us. And earthing means that the circuit is physically connected to the ground. So when we walk, we're physically connected, like I said. And grounding is that we may not be physically connected. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But we've got things that are becoming more popular, things like grounding sheets, grounding mats, and other things that work. And so, what it does, we're not physically connected necessarily with the earth, but it puts us into our electrical circuit, our own personal electric circuit has zero potential. We'll talk a little bit more about what that might mean, but it's the when people started using electricity in the homes and things like that, they didn't have grounding and they started having problems. And someone very much smarter than myself figured out they needed to ground the wires to make things work better and reduce fire and things like that. So there's our moderate or low rate explanation of electricity. And one of the things when I was looking at the health line, I wondered what can grounding do to help improve our health? And because people have talked about it I know I have people in my life that have talked about it for probably 3 or 4 years. Go ground, go earth, and things like
Mhm.
that. And like you, I did that. I've done that pretty much all my life. I remember I was in Idaho at college, and my mom happened to come by to visit, which didn't happen very often, but I had been running out to the mailbox in the snow barefoot. She's like, "You're gonna freeze your feet off." And of course I
Like,
didn't.
I'm not walking a mile, mom.
I know. I'm like walking on the cement and then I'm walking in about 4 inches or 5 inches in snow. But she was very worried. I was always doing that sort of thing. But when people are doing the grounding or earthing, then they're attempting to release negative ions in their body. And one of the positive effects it has, people say, is that it can just calm their nervous system. And so that is obviously good for a lot of people. And grounding has been researched for quite a while, like I said, because we've got National Institute of Health looking at it and seeing what they can find. And what they found is that it seems to improve a person's condition by reducing inflammation, improving cardiovascular disease, improving muscle damage, chronic pain, and mood. And what I when in my research I was looking at, it helps clear the electric connections between our actual cells because we can get too much connectivity in our cells, and it can decrease our immune response. And what they were saying is that the response can be a little bit like having antioxidants just by grounding. And they don't talk about doing it for any particular period of time. So it didn't say ground for 10 minutes and you're this much better, and ground for half an hour and you're that much better. It's not registered on that sort of a scale anywhere that I saw. But they just believe, the people who have researched this believe that the natural defenses can be restored.
Let's take just a moment and make
Sure.
sure that we state that none of this podcast is intended to be medical advice or anything like that. This is just informative, and although we are nurses, we are coming to you with a story, not medical advice. Okay, sorry.
Good job. Yes, we always get to remind, maybe we should have that in our intro.
Yeah, maybe we should.
And that's really important to know. And also, the reports of improvement are primarily subjective, but not completely. One of the studies that the National Institute of Health did was they had a fairly small, I mean, quite a small study. It was only 10 people, and they were grounded using patches on the palms of their hands and the soles of their feet. And they took measurements of their blood before and after grounding, and they wanted to see if there was any change in the red blood cell activity or fluidity or anything like that that affects heart health. And what they found in this actual study was that they had significantly less red blood cell clumping after grounding, which suggests benefits for cardiovascular health. And this is one of those things, and a lot of the things we talk about have, when you talk about using crystals or other natural or holistic practices, have few side effects that could be difficult, but always talk to your healthcare provider about any of these sorts of things. And one of the things that another, just a larger study that National Institute of Health talked about was they evaluated people who had post exercise muscle damage. So when we exercise, the point is to kind of make little tears in the muscle so that it repairs itself to makes it stronger, right?
Mhm.
Well, and that can be good, and sometimes it gets a little overboard. So researchers use both grounding patches and mats, and they measured the creatinine kinase, white blood cell count, and pain levels before and after grounding. Now, pain levels are completely subjective because everyone responds to pain differently. They studied the blood work again, and it indicated that grounding reduced muscle damage and pain in the participants.
Oh,
And
wow.
so it may actually influence healing abilities.
Mhm.
So the research is supporting that the grounding is providing pain reduction and move improvement. And 16 massage therapists alternated between periods of grounding and no grounding. And this is interesting to me, of course, because I'm also a massage therapist. I'm like, oh, we can have some discomfort because when the physical demands of physical or massage therapy is going on, it can be a stress on the body. And so the people mentioned what their physical and emotional stress they were feeling, and also what their pain level was. And they reported after earthing therapy, they had a decrease in their pain, stress, depression, and fatigue in
Mm.
all of the participants.
Wow.
Yeah, and so that really surprised me because there are a few studies that I've read that all of the participants benefited from something. Usually people
Yeah.
are neutral or yeah, it was kind of worse or whatever, but that all of them reported an improvement, and I thought that was awesome. And again,
Mhm.
it's these processes are often self-administered and self-reported. So the studies to me that were relying on the blood markers and things that detect inflammation is more impactful, I think, because that is numeric. That is repeatable and things
Mhm.
like that. That's really that to me says a lot more than someone's report. And we've talked a little bit about I think we've talked a little bit about the placebo effect where someone does something and they think it helps because they think it's supposed to help.
Mhm.
And in
And
this
then it
case
does help because
right.
they thought it was helping, and so it
Yeah.
actually does help? Yeah.
Yeah, and I have no problem with placebo effect. I feel like that's a really good idea. If we can have a benefit to ourselves from something that we just feel good about doing, then
Mhm.
heck, why not? And
Mhm.
these quantitative results, though, lend more credence, I believe, to
Of
a
course.
lot of this.
Yeah.
And so that was a really good realization. And so there are a variety of types of grounding or earthing. One we've talked about is walking barefoot.
Mhm.
And that's pretty much the easiest way to do it. And you can also lie on the grass, sand, or even mud. How many times have you seen your kids? I know I've seen my kids playing in the mud. And
Many, many, many times.
yeah, and a lot of times, at least my instinct was, "Ah, get out of the mud, you're dirty." But allowing our skin to touch the natural ground can provide us with grounding energy. And, of course, lying on the ground provides a full body grounding. And so if we can increase our skin to earth contact by lying on the ground, that's great. There's not always a place that we can go out and have full skin contact with the
Mhm.
ground, but if you can, then that can work. And but if the study I was reading on this says if you're going to ground yourself in this way, be sure to take proper precautions and never lie somewhere you can be injured. I feel like that's sound advice.
That is
Don't
sound
lie on the
advice.
train track to ground, um, or a wasp nest or anything like that, which one would think that was fairly obvious, but it made me laugh when I read that, and I'm like, "Okay, I need to put that in." People who advocate grounding, they say water can be used in the same way as the physical earth is used for grounding. And I feel like water is very therapeutic for me at any rate. And so if I can do water and grounding all at the same time, that's a pretty
Mhm.
happy
Yeah.
and just even just wading in the lake or swimming in an ocean. And obviously when walking into the water, most people are touching the ground. And so that was good. Do you have other examples that you might have used for grounding or something you've done that you felt assisted you to connect to the earth?
Well, I can tell you I also love water, and it's very important to me and really healing for me. Um, and I remember, one time when I went down to Southern California, um, I we went to the beach, and I just was literally overcome with, like, such love for the water that I ran into the water with my arms outstretched yelling, "I love you, I love you, I love you," and then as soon as I got to where I was up to my chest, I gave it a big hug. Of course, that didn't work very
Oh.
well because it's water, but I mean, oh, that was actually that was really awesome for me because I just it's how I felt and, like, I was able to act on it, and I definitely feel like, I benefited from it.
I love that. And when we watch back to watching children, they do all these things naturally.
Mhm.
As adults, I feel like a lot of times we have to say, "Oh, I should go outside and take my shoes off." Why is that a thought we have to think?
Right, right,
And
right.
and some people have asked me because I've talked about going without shoes for a long time, and when I went into massage therapy, the instructors recommended that we massage without shoes on so we
Mhm.
can connect to the earth. And I remember one of the students in the class said, "Well, but if we're in a building, we're not touching the earth." And the instructor said, "There's a couple things about that. One is the building is touching the earth,
Right.
and a lot of what we do in healing arts is intention."
Mhm,
And they said, if you have the intention of connecting to the earth and bringing that energy into you and to release anything that's negative, that creates that link too. And as I considered that, that felt accurate to me. That felt like, yes, it's part of the intention because I may not always want to go outside and ground when there's snow on the ground
mhm,
because it is cold.
mhm.
And so maybe I'll choose something else. Maybe I'll do it differently. And one of the things that they talked about was the various grounding equipment that's available and some ways that we can incorporate grounding into our own therapy, into the therapy of the people that we work with if we're doing healing arts, is by using grounding mats, grounding sheets or blankets, and grounding socks. Now, I have never used the socks, but I have used the grounding mats and grounding sheets. And I actually recently got some grounding sheets and I have
Like
that.
bed sheets?
Yeah, bed sheets.
Oh, okay.
It
Okay.
goes on the bed, and, one is to have direct skin contact, and, so I just sleep on it, and I
Okay.
sleep on it all night, and so I take it, and there's a wire that connects there's silver threads through it, and this is true on all of the grounding things I've seen, and the silver goes through it, and then there's a cord that attaches to it and then goes into the ground in an outlet, the
Mm,
third
mhm,
prong that we were talking about, because
mhm,
not all plugs have 3 prongs, and so there's usually a grounding open. And so, yeah, I've been using that, and it's been really nice. I feel like it assists me with sleep, because sleep has always been a challenge for me, and so
mhm,
I look every way I can to find a way to sleep better. And I talked to a friend of mine who has been using he was unable to talk on the podcast, but he's been using these grounding sheets and has noticed that he is feeling so much more rested, much healthier. And he said his pain, he had a back injury, I think 10, 15 years ago, and the pain from his back injury has reduced dramatically. And there's
hmm.
been nothing else he's changed. And he is so in love with these sheets that he's bought them for friends and family.
Oh,
And
wow.
he said, "You get to use these because they make a big difference." And I know, one of one of our teammates on Mystic Detectives has them, Justin, and he reported that he felt an overall wellness improvement. And he said he couldn't necessarily say it's A, B, or C, but just overall wellness. And he's been using his sheets for about a year now. And I obviously know that this is not hugely scientific. However, I like to talk to people that I know that are having these experiences, because that feels authentic to me, especially if
Mhm,
they start talking about it and they're not selling them, which they're not. And so that can really help. And, one of the things, like I said, in one of the research studies, they noticed, in it was the National Institute of Health again, that people who use these grounding mats or sheets with their chronic fatigue and, again, chronic pain, anxiety and depression, and sleep disorders have really noticed a difference. And they said that a lot of people will sleep on these sheets, like I said, or the mats. But even 1 hour of grounding therapy seemed to significantly improve mood. They noticed for the more chronic pain syndromes and some of the cardiovascular changes, it took a little bit more connection to the grounding mat or sheet to start noticing more of a difference. But 1 hour is better than no hours. And so
yeah.
some people say, well, if I can just use a grounding sheet or mat, I don't have to go outside. Well, I guess that's true. Yeah, however, there are some very, very strong benefits of going outside. But, I think about it when a person, maybe they can't go outside, but
Sure.
these anti-inflammatory or cardiovascular effects would be hugely beneficial to them, then these are ways that they can bring grounding to their lives. And I'm
Mhm.
I'm glad about that, because some of the people that probably need it the most are the people who can't get outside at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been bedbound 3 times in the last 3 years, I guess, and so I totally understand, what it's like to be able to not get outside and to,
Mhm.
you know, feel like you have to miss out on things, so it's nice to know that there is something that can be brought into the house, to be used by people who can't, who are bedbound or have mobility difficulties or whatever.
Right, right, and I think that's great, and I don't know if that can assist them to then be able to go outside or not, but all the research I did, there was no downside of grounding. There was nobody that said, "Oh, you can't do grounding if," and
Right.
again, we want people to make sure that it's okay with their healthcare provider. I mean, I don't know if it could affect pacemaker or anything like that. It doesn't look like there was nothing that mentioned it, but certainly check with your healthcare provider if you have something like that going on. And one of the things that I noticed that the all of the things that it seems like people are talking about us having health issues with, I can't think of anything that doesn't involve inflammation, right?
Mhm.
Where, well, it's because this is inflamed, that is inflamed. And if these grounding mats can assist that or grounding sheets can assist that, then that to me is really huge. Have you ever talked to anybody who's ever used any of these sheets or mats?
No, I didn't even know they existed until today.
Well, there you go. And it's funny. I don't know. Maybe it's more common in Washington,
Maybe.
but I've talked to quite a few people who have said that. And also, one of the things, you know how people talk a lot about electromagnetic radiation happening in
Mhm.
our environment now?
Mhm.
Some people believe that grounding helps mitigate the effects of that. And there's enough of it in our air and our environment. It's like, well, if it's not gonna hurt me,
Mm,
maybe I'll try that because
sure.
there are some indicators that this electromagnetic radiation may be problematic, but I haven't looked at any studies on that yet of whether it helps the electromagnetic or not, or even if electromagnetic radiation isn't a concern.
Mhm.
I know what people think, but
Sure.
some people feel very sensitive to the electromagnetic, frequencies. Is that what I would call it? Frequencies
Yeah, I
in
think
our
so.
lives? Yeah, and, I know I told you in one of our I think our early episodes, you had given me a very large clear quartz ball,
Uh-huh.
and I keep it on my desk around my electronics to mitigate that for myself.
Yeah.
Yeah, does it work? I don't know, but
I
it
don't
doesn't
know.
hurt, and I like to look at it, and it makes me think of
Right.
you when I do, so
Right.
that's always nice. Yeah, and so when we use the grounding, um, it's such an easy thing to do, and I have never had, the grounding they talk about grounding patches.
Mhm.
I didn't actually look up what that was, but, it sounds like that could be an easy way to go too.
Yeah.
So maybe that's something that we can report on. Maybe get to have some electromagnetic patches and let us know how things go. And the thing that when I was doing my research, some of the sources referred again to actual electricity in the house.
Mhm.
And I thought it was fascinating that our bodies seem to need that grounding as much as our electric systems in the house. But when we think about it, that's what we are, is
Mhm.
electric. And the things that make us run are electric. And when we have a disruption in that electrical system, it can cause all kinds of really big problems, including death and and things that need to be controlled, like I say, with things like pacemakers and but it just was interesting to me because even though I knew that, the more I looked at these studies and the information they had about grounding, the connection to the electricity that runs our homes surprised me. I don't know, maybe it's strange that it
Yeah.
did, but I just hadn't connected it that way. Have you ever considered that we run basically like an outlet?
I have, but that's just because that's how, the way the heart works was explained to me in nursing school, honestly.
Yeah.
So had my
Mhm.
teacher not explained it that specific way, I probably wouldn't have.
What did they say? Do you remember exactly?
They
Or
just said that it's like it's a complete circuit, just like in your
Mhm.
house. If you want electricity to work, you have to have a complete circuit. And so they just talked about how the electricity, goes from your sinus node to your whatever. I'm not going to try to remember all of it. I'm not a cardiology nurse, okay? But anyway, and then I also thought about it. Actually, I was reminded of it when I had my SVT episodes, which for the listeners is supraventricular tachycardia, or a really, really, really fast heartbeat, like 300 beats per minute. And that was because the electricity in my heart over here, not over here. was
Where is
I'm,
your
I'm
heart,
pointing.
Crystal?
I'm pointing at the wrong side. Anyway,
This, listeners, is when it's a good thing that you can't see us.
my the electricity in my heart was misfiring, and so that
Mm.
was another time that I was really like, wow, you know? I never really thought about it about the entire body necessarily being a closed circuit, but more of the heart because of that, my class than my SVT, but, I mean, really, that's exactly what it is. Our body runs on electricity and, you know, now I'm gonna get all technical, but the calcium and, potassium, exchanges are facilitating electricity, so
Yeah, and even the sodium in our bodies has a
and
positive
sodium, yeah.
charge,
Yep.
and so everything interacts, and what what interests me is that, as I said in the very beginning of this, we're acting like this is new information, that, "Oh, look, that can be a thing." And I look back at societies that are much older than we are and how they put these things together just in their general practices. I
Mhm,
mean, how many societies, and granted, maybe they didn't have shoes like we do now, but almost every society had some sort of foot covering. Yet
mhm,
a lot of them spent a lot of time without shoes on at all to be connected to Mother Earth. They may not have known it's because of electrical release or something like that, but they knew that being connected to the earth is a huge thing.
mhm,
And as we become more modern, like I say, we often don't connect to the earth itself. When you think of people who are in big cities and there's no actual ground, it's all cement or
yeah,
concrete or something. I I wondered as I was looking through this how not connecting to the earth affects people. Have you ever
mhm.
considered that?
No, I haven't, but I think it's interesting also because bigger cities and more, urban areas are also gonna have more of that electromagnetic, um, radiation, Jesus,
Mhm.
going, in their surroundings just by virtue of having more stoplights, more office buildings, more whatever. And so I'm not obviously neither of us are saying you shouldn't live in a big city or you shouldn't live in the city, but it is interesting to consider that maybe if you're in the city, you might want to be more conscientious of grounding, maybe. I don't
Mhm.
know. But
Yeah.
yeah, I also feel like for me, okay, typically our ex-husband is an exception, but typically people who live in rural areas have a much deeper appreciation of the earth and of grounding than people who don't. That's my experience. I'm not saying it's true of everybody except my ex-husband. I'm saying it's not true about him. But no, I have that's been my experience is that because they're more conscious and like the land, the earth is in their everyday life, right? If you're in the
Mhm.
hustle and bustle of a city, it's probably not really top of mind.
Well, and I was a camp counselor for the YMCA when I lived in California as a teenager, and we had a couple of camps that were specifically for kids from the inner city areas because they hadn't had opportunity to be out in nature. And we were in the redwood forest in California, in the Northern California area, and it was so fun to watch the kids connect with the
Mhm,
earth. And
mhm,
one of the girls I'll always remember, she was probably 14, and my job was to check their packs to make sure they brought stuff that made sense. Well,
uh-huh.
what was funny about that is I had never gone backpacking, so I didn't know, and I said to the director, I said, "Well, how do I know?" He said, "Oh, you'll know." Okay, and
Yeah.
so I was hoping I had what I needed, but one of the girls, we asked them to just put their stuff out so we could see it, and because we also didn't want their packs too heavy, and
Yeah.
one girl dumped out her pack, and she had a curling iron and a hair dryer. And I said, "Well, that's great. Where would you plan on plugging that in?" Because we were gonna go hiking in the mountains.
Mhm.
And she said, "Oh, there's no plugs?" I said
Yeah.
and I said, "No, unless you can, find a redwood tree that has an outlet in it, you're gonna need to leave this here." And one of the other kids who had no experience with backpacking either dumped out his pack, and he had, like, 10 cans of food. So canned whatever. I knew that didn't belong either. So the director who said I would know, he was correct. And the backpack full of stuffed animals and nothing else, yep, that was not the
Mhm,
one either.
mhm,
But, it was fascinating to me to see these kids just so excited and how in the studies, they talked about mood elevation, being outside and grounding, and I just saw the shift in these kids who had
mhm,
never seen this sort of thing, and it was outside of my realm to think that they had never been outside the city because I was raised there. We went to Yosemite for summers. We went all over the place and we were always outside. And,
Yeah.
um, and so just to watch that. So when they said in the research that mood improves even after just an hour outside or hour grounding on a mat or whatever it is, I remember even as a teenager being amazed at what change these kids experienced.
Mhm.
And I loved that. That was really fun for me.
That is really fun. Yeah, I also grew up in many, many canyons and valleys and lakes and big time outdoors. My dad's a big time. Oh, actually, as a matter of fact, my dad has a degree in um, outdoorsmanship. I don't know what it's called because he got it in like 1970 something, but um, he basically describes it as a degree in Boy Scouting, in being a Boy Scout. But so he was big time, like big time Mr. Outdoorsman guy. So as a matter of fact, it's funny, we were talking. I have another story that came up in my mind that's a little bit off topic, but a little bit not. So we had gone to in Wendover. There's a lake, and I cannot remember the name of it. I think it might be Crater Lake, but I think that also might be up American Fork Canyon. But regardless, there's a lake in Wendover that can be used for scuba diving training. My dad decided to take us all out there just to swim in it, and we had to walk from the wherever we parked through this marsh to the lake, and of course we had to walk back in this marsh in the lake. And again, I was a teenager, probably older than I was with the other thing. But I remember we walked to the lake, we swam, everything was fine. Well, my dad decided to take a different way back, and it ended up being like a much thicker slash deeper marsh area. And I ended up, ironically enough, getting something in my foot that gave me blood poisoning.
Oh, oh,
So
so in that case, grounding didn't work.
in that case, yeah, in that case, but it was just funny that the doctor had told him, within very few years that that wasn't a problem or a concern, and then here's him making me be barefoot, and it happens.
Oh, that's
But
funny.
but that's also actually a really good way to ground also, just go put your feet in some mud or go to a marsh where it's safe. I don't want anybody,
Mhm,
being unsafe, but get your get the mud and squish it between your toes. You can even make mud at home, but like just it's just there's just something to be said for just really, I mean, inserting yourself into the earth. And I don't know if that's gonna sound dirty or whatever, but I don't mean it that way. But yeah, I mean, it's one of the things I really love. Same with, digging into the sand on a beach.
Mhm,
Just digging your feet in and letting that sand go between your toes and all of that. And it just occurs to me now that if you are a person that has sensory issues and you're like sand between my toes, I'd rather die. Then
mhm,
then maybe a grounding mat or grounding sheets is a better option for you, right? Because I have kids
sure.
with sensory issues, and there if something we're suggesting doesn't work for you, um, we certainly don't don't have a judgment of that. We just want to help you know what some options are.
Yeah,
And of course, because we're human beings, we talk about what we like also. So just wanted to make that statement.
yes, and I think that's important, and I feel like in many of the other episodes, we talked about how there are some alternatives, and I like that these mats and these sheets and things are an alternative for whatever reason a person might
Mhm.
want them,
Yeah.
and I like that about it. And so, are there any other ways you can think of that a person might do this grounding or even connecting with the earth?
Well, we talked about it with the crystal healing, but there's always, crystals that are affiliated or associated with earth or grounding energy. Hematite is a big one. I don't know if we mentioned
Mhm.
that one last time.
I don't
Um,
think so.
but hematite's a big one. I'm trying to think of these
Wait,
off the top of my head.
hematite's the magnetic one, isn't it? Or it can be
It can be
magnetized, right?
magnetic, right? Yeah, it
So
can
it's
be
not
magnetite.
magnetic naturally?
It's not. Nope.
Oh, see, I always thought it was because every time I see it in the store, it's like those little
Yeah.
magnets, they go click,
No,
click, and I
it's
love
not.
that.
Yeah.
That's
It probably has more magnetism than other stones, but it is not naturally that magnetic. And I only know that from owning a crystal store. I wouldn't have known that
yeah.
otherwise.
Yeah,
Um,
I get that because, like I said, every time I've seen them, they've been on those little magnets, and
yeah,
I bought them for the kids when they were little because they thought it was fun to clack them together. Of course, now I know they were too small and they were dangerous, but at the time, I didn't know that,
yeah.
and, so I like them.
Hematite, to be true hematite, it should be heavy. It should be very, very dense. Um, and so often the magnetic ones are just made not from hematite at all. You can magnetize hematite as far as I know, but typically if you're getting the magnets, it's not truly hematite because
Oh,
they're
I
just
see.
they're too light and airy.
They're sort of
um,
pretend hematite.
yeah, exactly.
But
But
what's
like,
interesting with what you just said about, true hematite is very, very heavy, and that to me just makes it more earth-like and
yeah,
more
yeah, I agree.
grounding because it
Yeah,
is a heavy thing.
yeah. Um, Another thing that I can't remember if we talked about this or not. I feel like we maybe did, but another way that you can do grounding exercises, or I don't know if exercises, grounding
Activities.
activities, is through essential oils. And um, some really good grounding oils are like patchouli or vetiver or
The tree oils
the
can be
tree
grounding.
ones.
Mhm.
Um, and you know, I always say make sure they're genuinely essential oils, um, if if you're able. But just a little bit on your wrist or on your temples or even on your feet can really enhance or facilitate a grounding experience in my experience.
Mhm.
So.
Yes, and also, as we talked at the top of the show where we were saying that we can ground our own energy, and so I find that I like to ground my energy, which to me is shifting my focus. I like to do that when I'm going into potentially a stressful environment, and
Mhm,
if I can't go stand outside, which I often do if I know I'm gonna have to deal with something stressful, but if I can't, part of that intention we talked about earlier is to just focus my mind, clear it if I can, and just I like to envision a waterfall. And
mhm,
because water is so important to me, and the crystalline of the water flowing over me just to cleanse me and to it flows all over me and into the ground. And so in a way that is actually envisioning actual grounding. And that assists me to bring my energy into a calmer place and into a space where then I can think clearly, and even if I do it just a few seconds, it can make a big difference for me and my
mhm,
energy. Or if I'm doing energy work with someone else, I'll ground and clear myself so my energy doesn't get into their energy field,
mhm.
because I can't be someone who facilitates healing if I'm chaotic.
Yeah, yeah,
And so
for sure.
that can help it because as we mentioned during some of the other episodes, I am not always calm. And sometimes I have a bad mood. I know you're as surprised as I am, but but those activities can really assist because maybe I don't have time to go lie down on my grounding mat or go stand outside on the dirt or whatever like that. So we can bring it to ourselves and with our intention as
Mhm.
well.
Yeah, and I just thought of something super random, and I want to caveat it first that we do not condone or advise smoking. However, smokers, you guys go outside all the time. So take a moment and ground yourself while you're outside smoking and make that time more valuable. Also probably quit smoking because it's not good for you.
Mm.
And this is coming from an ex-smoker, but anyway, just a
Sure is.
thought I had, like, you're outside all the time. Take advantage of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good idea for us on a daily basis, whether we're smokers or not. Just those times where, oh my goodness, I have to run outside to do whatever. Maybe it can be considered a I get to run outside and do
Yeah, yeah.
whatever.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
because just that shift, that energetic shift in our own minds can then assist us to release the energy into the ground, the energy that gets to be readjusted.
Mhm,
And yeah, that's a good idea, that if people can focus on being out there and being outside. Now, as we mature, we may have a more difficult time lying on the ground, and Well, I'm doing a sound bath with a friend of mine this weekend, and we were saying, "Well, we could sit on the floor," and we looked at each other like, "No, we could, but we'll never get back up."
Exactly,
And
exactly.
we would like to do it in a slow and graceful way. Both of us are going, "Well, we'd have to haul each other up," and and so that doesn't work. But these alternatives, like we talked about, can really work for people throughout their lives. And have you ever it just I just had a vision of Juliana, my youngest, of the 2 of mine, my younger, and when she was a baby and I took her out on the grass, and as some babies do, she just didn't like the feel of grass on her feet when she was just
Uh-huh.
little tiny, and I remember holding her, so she was almost to the standing age, so she was probably 9 months, and I was holding her up, and I just sort of lowered her down towards the grass, and if she could have pulled her feet up over her head, she would have. She she ends up loving it. I mean, she lives in
Yeah.
Arizona now, and she walks outside all the time without her shoes on, and really does grounding and earthing all the time.
Mhm.
And but I just remembered, like, her little legs, really high up, and just wanting to get away from that. And I had a friend who got a new puppy who went outside into the grass for the first time and had a similar experience, and watching the little puppy trying to lift his legs as high as it could, but he had to be on some legs to
Yeah,
walk,
yeah.
but he was, like, hopping practically, and it was funny to watch that as a new experience for the dog. And then, like I say, as I
And then there's
remember Juliana,
my child that I put into the sand and she eats it.
well, maybe she's a little low on silica. But, yeah, everybody experiences things differently, don't they? That's funny. Well, those are the things I had on grounding and earthing, and I know for me, when it gets to be spring and summer, I'm so happy about it because I get to do those things more easily. Here again in the Pacific Northwest, we have a lot of water, and we our ground is often wet and or
Mhm.
frozen. And so it's more difficult to do in the winter time, but I still go outside at least every once in a while and stand outside for as long as I can. And and I enjoy it, and just taking those deep breaths and enjoying the connection with nature. And oh, one other thing I was going to tell you about, one of the little articles I read, and I don't recall which one this was, but they talked about grounding by, you talk about the tree huggers.
Uh-huh.
Well, they said, and I've had a lot of trees. I've hugged them a
And
lot. And one of the things that people have reported is that hugging a tree while standing on the ground themselves can even feel transformative.
mm,
And some people will feel like they're getting messages from the earth or the tree. I happen to be one of those people, but some people don't experience that, and that's okay. But I feel like most people I know that have done that sort of an experience have liked it, even if they thought it was really weird. They've liked it,
uh-huh.
but may not do it again, but they
Right.
like the experience at the moment. And I remember I was in a group one time, and we were in the redwood trees, and it was one of the giant trees, which, have you been to the redwood forest, the giant redwoods?
Yeah, is that what is around Lake Tahoe?
Where
Is it
the cars
Donner's
can
Pass?
well, there are redwood trees there, but there's a
I
big
don't know if I've
area.
been to the redwood forest. I may have only seen redwoods, like, at Donner's Pass and in Lake Tahoe.
Yeah, where there's, I think it's Sequoia National Park. I might be wrong with that, but there are redwood trees that are big enough that cars used to be able to drive through. They stopped doing it because it was damaging things, but they're huge. But we went to an area, this was in the Lake Tahoe area, and we went around some of these big trees, and we got enough of us to hold hands around the whole tree,
Wow.
and it was magical. And can I describe why exactly? No, part of it was because I was with people I knew and I enjoyed it, and it was earthing and it was hugging a tree and all of that sort of thing. But taking those moments in time for me to be out in nature and to be doing those things is what keeps me balanced.
Mhm.
And and so for our listeners, I would love to have, if they don't do it regularly now, give it a go and let us know what they experience.
Yeah.
And our email address, which we mentioned at the end here, but write into listeners at mysticdetectives.com, and we'd love to hear your stories and let us know what you experienced or what you have experienced in earthing. And if you've experienced something that didn't work or you felt uncomfortable, we'd like to know that too, to see maybe what could shift, or if there's something else we can let people know they could try, then we can do that too.
Yeah, I agree.
Awesome. Well, thanks for this chat. I know I've enjoyed it, and our listeners will at least learn what we think about the ground.
Yeah, that's true.
And if you want to look anything else up, like I say, I'm going to put the links that I looked into on our YouTube channel when this podcast drops. The National Institute of Health has a lot of different studies about it. So if you're interested in some perspective of these scientific studies, then that is a good place to look. In fact, it's a good place to look for pretty much any topic you may want. Some of the articles are more scientific than others. Some of them are heavy to read. Many of them are, at least in the summary and conclusion, you can get the point. And so if you don't want to read the whole scientific study of it, which of course I'm a science nerd, so I do, but if you don't, the summaries can be good. And just
Or
Googling,
if they're really sciencey, the abstract, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And they have some really, really great information. And also all of those articles come with their own sources of
Mhm.
finding sources. So if a person wants to go down a rabbit hole to any of these topics, that's a good place to look. And there's a whole bunch of other places to look, but that's where I lean, because that's what I've been involved with.
When Holly uses an article for something, for to cite it or whatever, she always goes to see how many times its citations have been cited. And if she
Right.
finds one that's been cited, hundreds of times, then she goes down that rabbit hole, as you said, to
Mhm.
that, to that publication. Anyway, so it's funny you said that because, yeah, there's truly a rabbit hole of citations. Just you can go forever.
Yeah, and then if you're like me, you look at it and go, "What was I supposed to be looking at? I don't even remember."
Right? Yeah,
Don't know.
exactly.
Anyway, alrighty. Well, I think that brings us to our conclusion. So I'll talk to you again soon.
All right, talk to you later.
We'd love to hear from our listeners. To leave a comment, share a story, or ask a question, email us at listeners@mysticdetectives.com. You can also find out about our Patreon and other interesting things going on at our website, mysticdetectives.com. As always, we invite you to subscribe, share, and leave reviews to support the podcast. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next week. Stay curious.
And keep exploring.